Toi tai mai I tēnei ata mō tātou hui o te Maori Advisory Committee. Ka nui tā aroha ki a kiti o koutou kānohi. I kānohi I roto I tēnei whare. Me a rātou he I runga I te pakitara. Henare ka mihi ki a koe I oho. Tēnei wā, ka huri taraka ki a koe ape I whakatuwhera tātou hui I te kupu o te atoa. Me he whakamihi ki te whānui.
Tihe Maori o, ko te amorangi ki mu, ko te hapai o ki muri. Te turutanga mahi pono te mari mana mo te hake. Whanno, hara mai te toki. Hongi e, hui e.
Oi e.
I ngā mate, me ngā tini ai tua o ngā marae, karangatanga maha. Ka mihia, ka tangihia tātou I tēnei wā. Nau mahara, ki te matinga nei, o JB. A reira I ngai nei, te matinga nei o Pat McGill. Nā reira, I te matua kāharua, piki te ka, piki te ora, piki te maramatanga. Nā reira, apiti hono tātai hono, rātou te hunga mat ki a rātou, apiti hono tātai hono, tātou te konohi ore ki a tātou hui mai nei. Nā reira, whānau kua tai mai. Whānau o tēnei kaunihera a rohe o te mataua Maori. Nau mai, whakapiri mai. Nā reira, ka huri ki a koe e te manakai whakahaere hau. Bill, weramu, nau mai, hara mai. Hara mai I wainganui a mātou. I runga nei I tēnei kaupapa nei hei whakapiri mai o te rōpū Māori, I ngā mema o tēnei kaunihera. Nā reira, kei te kō tanāku mātou katoa. Ara ki ngā mema Māori ko tai mai koe, ki te tautoko nei tēnei kaunihera, I te taha nei o te iwi Māori, me te iwi Pākehā hoki. Nā reira, tēnā koe. Tēnā koe, Alison. Ka ni te mihi kia koe. Ko koe te kaimahi hau, mo Analia. Nā reira, nau mai, haere mai.
Tāpai.
Kia ora tātou katoa. Kia ora, tuira. O tama nei o ngāhiwi. Ngāhiwi te mona. Tēnā koe. Haere mai I wainganui a tātou. Nā reira, I te taha nei o Anna. Nā reira, ka nui te mihi kia koe e hoa. Huri no hoki, ngā kaimahi nei o tēnei kaunihera, ka nui te mihi kia koutou. Ngā mema o tēnei poari. Kia ora, tamate ariki nui. Waipatu Mārei, tēnā koe e hoa. Nā reira, tēnā koe e te whanaunga nei, Pierre, ka nui te mihi kia koe. Mike, te mana tēnei rōpū, ka nui te mihi. Huri no hoki, me tō tātou nei rangatira hene wai, kia ora, tēnā koe. Me te whānau kua tai mai, kārero taku kōrero, he karaki a tātou. Hei mua koe I ua, hei tō I a mātou mai kato. Ko koe na hoki e whakakahi a mātou ki whai krori ai koe a mātou mai kato. E me tīmate, e me mahi, e me whakoti I roto I a koe. Kia whiwhi ai hoki mātou ki tōra tonu te me ata whainei e koe. Koe klairi hoki tō mātou ariki. Āmene.
Āmene.
Mai mui miti kia koe te matua kāroa. Me ngā kia pūwai. Kia pūwai tō aroha. I roto o mātou nākau katoa. Koe nā ta mea nui a tēnei au huri ki ngā pike ngā he katoa. Tautoko mai a whina mai ngā whānau katoa e mawubi ana, tai mahana, I roto nei te hoi pera me te kainga. Me ngā whānau kiri mate, he mamai tonu te nākau tēnei wā. Ara ki te whānau nei a JB me Pat McGill hoki, piki te kaha, piki dora, piki na maramata. kia kina mai, arihina mai a mātou katoa, e haere mārunga nei I te huarai. Ia rā. Me ngā whānau e haere tawhiti ro ki te tāwai. Me tō rātou hokinga ki te wā kāinga, huri no o te motu. Nā reira ki horo te mārino ki a whakapapa pau namu te mona ki a tere te karohi. I runga tingo te matua, the tama me te wai rua tapu. Nā reira tuturu whakamaua ki a tīna.
Tīna.
Hui e.
Tai ki e. Kia ora.
Tēnā te api kami kia koe I tīwhera tātou hui I te kupu o te atua. So keeping with our tikanga and our kawa, since we have some new faces at the table this morning, then we should start off with our whanaungatanga. So since Api got 90% of the way through his pepe heart, Api, can you might as well finish off and tell us who you are, Api?
Ka api Robin taku ingo, ko ai te tahi o ngā member o Whanganui Aorotu, Whanganui Aorotu, no Koho Pātiki. Kia ora.
Nā koe, Rose. Whanganui Aorotu.
Kia ora koutou, ko Rosie Hiha hau. I'm here for Te Whanganui Aorotu. Kia ora.
Pete?
Tēnā rā koutou, ko wai ko Piri na hau, Te Whanganui Aorotu, Chairman of Mōtio Marae as well. Me.
Nelson?
Morena tātou, ko Martin Williams tuku inō, ko au te tahi o ngā mema o tēnei kaunihera nā ahureri.
Tēnā tātou, Roger Markin o Takapau, I te taho o Tamatea. Kia ora tātou.
Tēnā tātou, ko Paura Shasha, no Pōranga hau. Ka hungu te iwi I Ngāti Kere te hapu. Tamatea ariki nui te tai whenua. Tēnā koe.
Te Māori e koutou katoa, nei rā te mihi ki a koe matua api mō te reo tuatahi I whakawhetai ki runga I a tātou. Ngā marae maha, ngā hapu maha o Ngāti Kahungunu tēnā koutou. Ko Hini Wai Ormsby tēnei noko nei a hau, ko ai te tia mana o tēnei kaunihera, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ora.
Tēnā tātou katoa. No ingarangi, ko te puna, I whānau mai a hau I Ghana, Africa. Heoi, I tipu ai a hau I raro I te maru o Taranaki Moanga. Ki te taha waongana awa. I raro I te mana o Te Ariawa. Kei te whanganui a tāra, au I noho ana anaenei, me tako hoa, rangatira, Maggie. Ko Waihau, ko Bill Bayfield. Ko Tumu Whakarai, te kaunihera a rohi a te mātou a Maui.
That was a mouthful. I changed the end.
Kia ora.
Very important though. Very important to know who you're working for, right? Pleasure to be here. And that'll do for now. You can ask questions later.
Tēnā koutou, ko Alison Aho, ko Tainui te iwi, ko Tainga te hapu. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou. Peter Martin, Senior Governance Advisor with the Regional Council. Fairly face to you all.
Kia ora koutou, Mike Paku, Heretanga Tai Whenua, one of the co-chairs of our Māori Standing Committee.
Tēnā koe api, nau nei whakaritea mai rei a tātou I te rangi nei, no rea kātika. E piringa mate kai rungi a JB, kai rungi a te karau a Pat, a koe rā ko Kataraina Wāti, no Ngāti Hene Manu, tūpakoiri. Me ki rā tētahi anō, kei rua hāpia, ko Eugene, ko whānau Chadwick tēnā, no rea piringa mate. Penny Munro, te pauwhakarai, for our council here. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora koutou, ko te ura tō moana tōku ingoa, no Waipatu Marae. Te whiore hau o Mārei. See me following Uncle Mārei around. There's a new tale.
E tēnā koe te irumati ana, me koe te pāwhakawairua he mihi ka waki kia timatai me te karakia, kia whakahorihia e rā ngā me pai e pāna me ki, rātou i haere atu ana, rātou tātou koto, ko Māori aputu ahau, no te taiwhenua here taunga. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, ko ana te whai tūtoku mua no Waitangi Marae. Kia ora.
Kia ora, ka tai mai te wairua hōpupu mā tangi rau. So we'll start off within the room, then we'll go to the wall. Just a quick kōwai koe. We've got some new faces in the room.
Ngā mihi kia koutou. Ko Pōkeri tako i mō. Ko te wairo hōpupu o nengi mā tangirau te hawa. I'm sorry I'm late. So I'm with the tribe too late. E tēnei rā. Kia ora.
Haere ki te whakitara. Enare.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Can you hear me?
Yep. Ai.
Kia ora. Ko Henare Mita hau. No Nuhaka hau ko au te mema te tahi o ngā meme e rua o te taiwhenua o tō wairua. A tēnei te mihi atu.
Well.
Kia ora katoa, no Takapau rātou, ko Will Foley toko ingoa. I'm the councillor for Tamatea.
Nathan, since you're on the wall, not in the room.
Ko Nathan He, toko ingoa, I'm the Māori Relationship Manager for Northern Hawke's Bay.
Kia ora tātou. Ka mihi kia koutou, nā kaimahi o te kaunihera. Ka mihi kia koutou me ngā manuhiri tai mai shaima. Tēnā rā koutou, ka mihi kia koutou. So, first and foremost, we have some apologies. We have an apology for Uncle Hami. So Uncle Hami's at Waipati. I don't know why.
Maori party.
There'll be an announcement, no doubt, later on today to clarify that situation, but that's where Uncle Hami is. Do we have any other apologies?
Chair, just that I'll have to leave at 10:10 to get my father to Pat McGill's tangi.
We'll be finished no later than 10:30.
We have apologies from Baden.
Apologies from Baden. Any other apologies?
Sophie Sears, one of our councillors.
And Charles.
And Sophie Sears.
And Sophie Sears. Sears.
Yeah, just on that, Chair, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate place to say it, but Sophie and I have arranged an exchange of committee roles. We thought, given the link between this committee and the Recovery Committee, it would be important for her, some of the kaupapa of this meeting, for her to be nominated to this committee by the council in my place.
I'll leave that with you.
For next meeting.
I'll leave that with you guys.
Yep.
So can I have a move in a second? Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Api. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Carried. Once again, a further apology. We're going to compress our meeting today in regards to the tangi for Pat to make sure we can get people away. We looked at trying to postpone the meeting to a later date. Unfortunately, the calendar is quite full in regards to council. The only dates that were available were actually dates that have been set aside for holidays for our council, and of course our staff take that opportunity as well and take their holidays. So rather than cut into their already scheduled breaks, we went with a compromise which was to compress our hui and deal with the stuff we need to deal with, and we'll take everything else as read. The main kaupapa for hui, for our taki today, is around the recovery, Gabriel recovery, because as we all know, that's on our whānau's minds right now. So that's our main focus for today's hui. The other one was in regards to confirming our committee membership, and there's one area of discussion, and that is around the Environmental
Climate Action Committee.
Climate Action Committee, and a bit of amalgamation in regards to the Recovery Committee. Kampai, so we'll deal with that as we get to it. With that, I'm going to turn over to our operations to help lead us through this. we have Jana call for short-term appointments, alternate members. Ana Te Paiti for Harmy Hilton. Can I have a mover, please? Yep. Thank you, Api, and thank you, Polder. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried, thank you. Moving through, confirmation of minutes. The minutes have been out for quite some time now. If there are no admissions, corrections, which you should have got in to the secretary before now. Thank you. Move Henry White. Seconded Rose. Any further comment? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried, thank you. Minor items. Look, we won't have time to deal with minor items, but if there's something you want information from out of council, to get that information to you, are there any items that anybody wants information on?
I did, but it will cover it in the recovery corridor, so I'll
Cool.
just leave it to that.
Okay, we can come back to it at the end of it if we're missing anything. Okay? Kapai, thank you. With that, we're going to move to item 6. Nominations to the Maori Committee, representatives to council committees. Who's leading this out of ops?
I'm happy.
Thank you.
Chair. But you can take the paper as read and invite any questions before we go to the recommendations.
So just to give some clarity, can we have some clarity around the amalgamation of the two committees, the Recovery Committee and the Environmental Committee, as to why those two committees got, I think, amalgamated? And the understanding around the whakaaro around the appointments and the makeup of those committees. Whoever's leading that.
Oh, I can start us, kia ora, Chair. So what we traditionally have is an Environment and Integrated Catchment Committee. And that really does deal with a lot of our catchment management mahi and our asset management mahi. But given that we're in recovery, the council looked to adjust that committee to deal with recovery. There will still be elements of the Environment and Integrated Catchments terms of reference, activities that are dealt with, but with a recovery focus. So we did need a place, a group, a committee to deal with recovery, and that was seen as the best way to change what we had into what we need to deal with now. But that's the premise of it. If we have officers here, so either Desiree or Peri could talk further to that.
So Justin, just before you sign off,
Yeah.
Henry White, so my understanding that from the council's perspective, it is the full council
Absolutely.
that have gone on to that committee?
Yep.
Why? Why did you decide to put the whole council in there?
Well, that's what the membership was for the EICC committee.
Yep.
And the changes in terms of membership include 2 from the Māori Committee and 2 from the RPC to ensure that we get coverage across the rohe, particularly those impacted areas in Hawke's Bay, and provide for greater tangata whenua membership compared to the EICC, which only had 1 from each.
Yep. And just further to that, so the recovery stuff has actually become business as usual for the most part. Would that be a fair assessment? It seems to pop up at every virtual council meeting we have. There's a component of that recovery stuff that's sitting in there.
Within council meetings? Yes, there will be.
A number of workshops that sit in there as well. Carpon, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and I suppose I'll just take the point you said, business as usual, but then obviously people in the community are still suffering.
Yep.
And then it's around delivery of resources, and I've seen the government response, but then I think there's still a whole lot of affected communities.
We can cover that off, Peter, when we get to the recovery stuff.
Okay.
We'll just deal with the committees at the moment. Anything from the officers they want to add?
I'll just, Desiree, Strategy and Governance Manager, just add that the frequency of the meeting has increased. So EICC used to meet quarterly and the Recovery Committee is going to meet 6 weeks.
Yep. Kapai, any questions in regards to the makeup of that committee? So if we remember, we went back prior to prior to the cyclone. We had made a number of recommendations. One was Kataraina. The other one was Dr. Roger Marker, needed to be confirmed, and then we also had Mare as an alternate for that committee. Of course, cyclones changed that. The RPC is made up out of their co-chair and their deputy chair. Suggestion here is we keep it at a high level as well, but that's the discussion. I have had a conversation with Roger. Roger, did you want to add anything here?
No, that's fine.
Yeah. Kapai, so.
Chairman, yep, if I may too as well. I guess my paper is I'm going to report back very shortly is focused right on this whole climate adaptation change and of course the impact around resilience. I just noticed, the numbers and of course the impact of representation for Here Taunga, given our marae over there were quite significantly along with the ahuriri. So I just want to see if I can step myself into this because one, as I'll report back, we're between as a community, a tai whenua, between the well-being of our community and the environment, of course, local authorities, and just to have that voice around the table. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
And the same for Te Whanganui-a-Rotu. Obviously, we've lost marae, and our whānau's have lost whare. And are we totally happy with the recovery? Well, I'll say we're not.
Yep.
And so we need to have a voice because there's some of our whānau being left behind. So I'll be quite adamant on that in relation to Te Whanganui-a-Rotu.
Ka pai, so back to the officers.
Yep.
So there's the voice of our whānau starting to come through. I think there has to be some realisation as to it all has to work, and I don't think anybody's going to be happy with the recovery plan. It doesn't matter who you are, because you're not going to get everything you want in your recovery plan, as a regional recovery plan. Whether you're a land user, whether you're just a resident, whether you're from Tamatea right through to Wairoa, it is how do we get the best as we possibly can out of the discussions, because they're all high-level discussions at this end. Remembering regional council is only one part of the recovery plan in regards to the input that goes into it. You also have your local territorial authorities who also input into this plan. We also have our own Māori entities who form part of that, as well as Matariki. So there are a number of levels, a number of touch points in which we get our input into the regional recovery plan. Despite that, we will still not get a fully satisfactory plan out of this for anybody. We're all going to have to give up something to get there. Any further discussion?
Yep, and I suppose for us, for Te Whanganui-a-Rotu, obviously our operational planning and that's responded. We measure outcomes. So our KPI is what happens at our marae. So our marae's been flooded and destroyed. So we're looking for, whether it's local, central government here, we're looking to step. A lot of promises have been made, and we want to see delivery on those promises, because we'll soon complain. And if we're not getting served locally, we'll be going to government and saying, hey, you need to step up. Because I've heard local government say they're going to do this, do that. And I'll use Motio as an example. Have we seen a lot of support for our marae? No, we haven't. So that's a litmus test when you're looking at testing delivery, and we'll test that, because obviously we want to see some support for our marae. I'm just saying it's better to give an example rather than waffle on. And we have, so that's just a key point I want to make in this.
I'll come to Penny, then I'll come to Porter.
Kia ora, Chair. I just want to get clarity on what the discussion point is here.
Yeah.
Are we actually talking about the recovery plan and the committee and what it will be doing, or are we actually talking about the representatives?
We're talking about representation.
Because we do have an item later for the recovery discussion.
Before we jump into that.
Yeah.
Porter?
If I could just give an example here, we had the mayor and we had Will come to Porongahau, and what happens in the community is you identify these people and where they're from, and they're on the lips of everyone. And I thought that it's a great thing just to know that someone, and you put a face to it. makes a huge difference to how people see things, and when they want a question about this, a question about that. And if you can get a reaction, that's good. I've come to see Will today, for instance.
Yep. Ka pai, any further? So we're only talking about the representation here, not the recovery plan itself. That's another conversation.
But I suppose the representation reflects recovery, so it's intertwined in the makeup, hey? So we just got to be nice and clear, because our representatives are held accountable to deliver as well, like all public officials, government officials. So, yeah, we just need to be clear on that representation.
So let's understand how this representation is made up. So it's made up of all council members. So that includes our 2 Māori regional Māori councillors. It also has the co-chair and the deputy chair from out of the regional planning committee. And it's also going to have 2 from out of the Māori Standing Committee.
And I think when you look at the combination of environmental, do we want to be fully engaged? I'm just speaking to whanganui for the recovery, yes, but as that committee's briefs widen to include those other corridor, well, yeah, I mean, we're happy, but I suppose the recovery is an important take for our marae. I just need to clarify that because you've combined two committees.
If I may, Mr Chair, just clarification, did you say the chairperson of the Māori Standing Committee as well?
Yeah, so we're looking at two chairs, just to give it the gravitas in regards to the representation from out of our committee alongside them.
Okay.
Are we happy with that? Are you happy with where we landed with that? I might have rephrased that wrong. Can we live with that?
What around the representation are you talking?
The representation in regards to that.
And I'm just saying, where does Te Whanganui o Rotu sit in regards to that recovery membership in that committee? Because we're looking, obviously for our marae, that have been flooded and destroyed, we're looking for representation in regards to that recovery, because we represent our ahuriri marae.
Yep.
So if we haven't got a voice on that recovery team, we need to have confidence that our voice, and at the moment it's a little bit lacking.
Yeah, Roger.
Yes, from the time you called me and gave us quite some thought, like the others, we're concerned about our voice, the tamatea voice. However, I don't know that there's any mileage in busting our butt about representation on this committee, because the committee can't have everybody there, and we have to trust the professionalism of those who represent our voice. However, I say this quite clearly, if we in Tamatea feel like we've been left out of the equation, you'll hear from us loud and strong. And that's all I can say at this. I'm not debating any membership or representation. I'm just saying, if we feel for one instance that we're not being considered seriously in the rebuild and that, then you'll hear from us.
If I may, Mr Chairman, I just want to ensure that there's an inclusive approach to this all. And I've often said that there's been a huge mistrust in terms of the interface that we've had as our tai whenua. So, yeah.
So it's incumbent on those that represent us as Māori.
And to give an example, obviously the Mātariki plan's been released yesterday.
Yes.
And where does our ahuriri marae fit within that governance group that's made those decisions and put forward that plan? Because is there any funding being allocated towards our marae? I don't think there is, and then I'd have a grave concern if we haven't been recognised within that structure that sits in regards to regional council having input. That leaves a big question mark about delivery. So how do we, as a tai whenua, have confidence if we've been left out of that process and we have 3 marae destroyed and they're not in front? So that comes back to representation about people delivering, and if people ain't delivering, I've got a huge question around that whole governance structure. I need to put that on the table, because that's what our Māori feel. We've got 3 marae that we're trying to rebuild, and if we've got no resourcing to build those maraes, brings into question representation.
So if I can summarise that up, you're putting those that are on that committee on notice that they have an obligation, especially those that represent Māori, have an obligation to ensure, that we're getting those messages back through and delivering.
And in regards to that, yesterday, that committee that sits here, Matariki, that's supported by regional council, if we're not on that template, then why aren't we on the template? Because that demonstrates a bad we are? Yep, okay. So we need to know that.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, we're not putting anyone on notice, but we need to be recognised. Whanganui Aotearoa needs to be recognised. So why can't we just add another person? Just change the rules a wee bit.
He'd like to say something.
Yeah. At risk of not conflating everything into this decision that sits in front of us at the moment, I just need a bit of clarity, particularly from the minutes. Katarina Kawana is currently on the EICC. Are we saying that Katarina is no longer on there? And what's the nomination process in terms of bringing under the current, without increasing, but under the current 1 or 2, who might those be? What's the process to elect those?
I don't think we're quite got that. I think we're looking, the conversation is having confidence, especially from Mount Whanganui Aotearoa, Tonga, Tamatea, Wairau, that actually this committee is going to be able to actually deliver in regards to supporting.
Yes, exactly. But yeah.
They're
So I'd
actually
like to nominate Peter.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
So we'll just put him, mate, and then we can move on.
Oh, because it is a nomination process.
Of course.
Yep. Katarina, you've already nominated her.
Yeah.
But and the representation, because for us it's around, for Te Whanganui Aotearoa, it's around recovery and it's recovery for our marae. So what we done previously in that representation model, it was a different set of circumstances, but when obviously the cyclones come through and we've lost our marae, it's changed our thinking in regards to the kōrero and what we need to do, because it's our whānau turning up to our marae saying, hey, fix your marae. You need to fix the marae because we've closed the marae down. So we just got to, for us, it's just making sure we've got surety in the process. And then what's currently happened, it's just, I'm not saying negatively, I'm just saying we've got some concerns that we've been left behind. And we want to make sure our marae are getting.
Everybody has those concerns, Peter. Everybody has those.
But decisions have been made, and then it appears that we're not in the decision.
Decisions will always get made.
Yep.
Through you, Chair, is it a matter of the terms of reference and therefore in the recovery committee itself that brings any surety in terms of its future discussions around the terms of reference? Because that describes what the purpose and the focus of that committee is and how it operates. And so it's getting satisfaction in terms of that.
What's that in the measures?
Terms of reference for the recovery.
Because you can use a reference document, but around those KPIs and how we measured at the marae when we rebuild. We're going to put our wall back up. We're going to line it. We'll bat it. That's how we're measured at the marae when whānau come. I'm just saying around the measurements.
So how does the regional council fit into that?
Well, they're part of the process to implement the plan. So councils, government, they're all talking, and they're going to be on the delivery model. So we need to make sure that delivery model meets Māori expectations as mana whenua.
My understanding actually they're not on the recovery committee. The recovery committee is different.
Yeah.
The representation around that is different. They feed in.
So they're having no impact? No, because what I've read, they're all part in that matariki strategy. No. So is that
clarity, please?
You've got a recovery committee and the recovery agency, and then you've got the recovery committee, which is a subcommittee of regional council. They're two separate. It's not that they don't talk to one another. They are related in terms of the recovery context, but they are two different entities, so to speak.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to give you to the best of my ability what I've learned over 3 days. But I've also, you need to know that natural events and disasters seem to follow me in my career. So I've worked all through PSA in the Bay, all through earthquakes and floods in Canterbury, both Christchurch and Kaikoura. And so I'm reasonably familiar, but I just have to say that lessons learned out of all of that, each one of those, means that the way the government is constructing this one is different. And so therefore all of us are trying to work out exactly what is the kind of structure. And you'll see a diagram, there's a 1 page floating around, but it doesn't tell you very much at all. The first thing for me is the government's decided not to set up an authority or an agency the way it did at Christchurch. It's clearly looking for locally led, as it would call it, but it also lowers its workload associated with that. The government set up a task force
So there's a cabinet committee, first of all, chaired by Grant Robinson. And that is the ministers that are impacted and affected. Then we drop to a task force. Forgive me, I know Rosie's part of your name, but Rosie and I met the task force on Friday, and Rosie and I just had a chat, and I think we both agreed that they didn't know really what they were doing either. They were here to explore and find out, but they really didn't know. We understand that they believe that they're to remove, shall we say, blockages, and to kind of make things happen, a link between government and this region, and that's great, led by Sir Brian Roach. He couldn't come on Friday, and that's that group, but they're not getting their hands dirty, and they're not the conduit by which the money comes. It comes basically from Cabinet. Then there is Matariki in this region, as I understand it, formed for a different purpose, but very valuable because of its unique mix of who's on it and the kind of depth that it has in all the different communities. But it's not a statutory entity. And that Matariki has formed a recovery agency, which is also selected as a subgroup specific for that purpose, and they are tasked by the Cabinet with putting together our regional recovery plan. And that's what we all finished on Friday, and it went in yesterday, and many of you have seen that. We did ours and put ours in, and we don't really know the full extent of the others that have gone in. I hope some of you have done locality plans. You were able to.
haven't.
And I was aware that some of the Maori that we visited on Friday were doing that. But that's only a first cut. And that is put together by the recovery agency, which at the moment is Kiriana Brooking and about 2 other people. It's really not a lot. And they're putting that together, and that's going down. Now, my understanding that goes to Wellington, all right? And Wellington makes the decision on what monies will come our way as a result through both the budget and through pre-budget announcements. In fact, I've just received a text that tells me there was to be a pre-budget announcement on silt today, but that's been put off because of a certain more political event that's going to be announced today and the ramifications from it. But nevertheless, what I want to make clear is I've been trying really hard after 3 days. I can't work out the wiring diagram. I can't work out who's making the decisions. I can't work out who's going to be accountable for delivery, etc. And the regional council, to my mind, is one player. Now, we're a key player because it was a flood. So our core function is around river management, one of our core functions. So that means we're in this, and we know we've got a hell of a lot of work in front of us. If we can carry your issues and take them forward, of course we will. All right, I think that just goes without saying with what I'm saying in front of me, and certainly that's one thing that's been absolutely stressed to me as I've taken on this job, that relationship with you guys is just critical. All right, but I can't, please don't be sitting there thinking that regional council knows some secret way or is on all the right committees and all the decision-making groups. I don't even think some of the decision-making groups know they're the decision-making groups at the moment.
So anyway, the main purpose of this particular recovery group, regards to Hawke's Bay Regional Council, is around your core responsibilities in regards to the waterways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Flood protection.
So when we hear from Louise and Desiree around the recovery committee, it's one of its core purposes is to build a regional resilience plan. Now that first cut, like all the other locality plans from the district councils and those hapu who have put together one, went in on Friday as phase 1. There'll be a phase 2 before August, September. So being a part of this HBRC recovery committee is to further develop the regional resilience plan in terms of our role and responsibility for the taiao in Hawke's Bay.
Chair, just building on what Aniwai and Bill have shared, the groundwork for that recovery plan, which feeds up to the agency, and they're going to coordinate and rationalise and make sure that it's singing with one voice up to the task force and government, The next steps for that plan that Hiniwai just mentioned is to engage with mana whenua and communities at place and under a principle which is right at the front of the plan, one of 6 objectives, a genuine partnership with Maori. So it won't just be a question of representation to this committee. That's the beginning and the end of the recovery plan. The model is very much grassroots to the top. So I'm not sure if that assists take some of the heat off the representation question.
Thank you. Kia ora, Baden.
Kia ora tātou. Kia ora, Mike. We had the Matariki governance group meeting yesterday, and within that hui was the recovery agency, currently led by Kiriana, but the board, the chair of the board, the agency board was there. Forget his name anyway, but
Keith. Yep.
But you know, I think there's and I'm on the Cyclone Gabriel Task Force, the National Task Force, Sir Brian Roach. So I think we've all got a role to play, and certainly Regional Council and the Maori Committee have a role to play. But what we saw at the meeting yesterday was everyone was looking at each other, looking at me as a member of the task force, thinking that that a lot of these decisions are going to be made at the task force level. But we're actually looking at the regions, and we're looking at the localities. So I think we need to come to terms with who's playing what role real quick. Otherwise, we're going to be wasting a lot of time looking around. In actual fact, the recovery agency put their hand up to try and pull together local government, the councils, and responsible parties to actually start. This is about the rezoning take to start actually getting to the kiko of the kōrero. But I guess that would be my. And from an iwi point of view, we have the likes of Shade there, the hui. We have Niall here that are keen to be part of that discussion. But I think we need to get there pretty fast, Mike.
Yep.
And not looking for others to be doing the mahi, because I think it's us that are here in the region, us that are here in the local areas.
Thank you, Baden. Okay, so based upon that, where have we landed? So, I hope that's helped Pete to help you understand what the role of this particular company
and I understand the role, and it's not a attack on Hawke's Regional Council, because I know there's a process, but I couldn't sit in this meeting
without raising
for Te Whanganui Aotearoa and for all our marae, not just one marae, to say we've got concerns and we need representation, irrespective of whatever committee you've still got the terms of reference to adhere to, and then you've still got KPIs built within the delivery model. So, I just need to make that point clear. And sometimes if you're not helping row the waka, then sometimes you get left behind. Yep. So I just need to make sure we have a voice within whatever framework's put forward. And then and Bailey, he was in that committee meeting yesterday. My discussions is, hey, you might be a little bit light for Te Whanganui Aotearoa in regards to the modelling. And we have locality plans been a bit light. Hey, we've been busy at our marae and our whares doing the mahi. We haven't had time to attend all these meetings. But now that we're coming out of that process where our whares are dug out, now we need to be part of the process on the recovery and to make sure, like any other members of the community that are suffering, that we have a voice. So I just need to make that point.
Cool, thank you for that, Pete. Marty?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just want to pick up, and the reason why I did ask about that clarification, at least Hera Tauranga had a voice with your role, Mr. Chairman, in there. And given the oversight that Ngāti Kahungunu play insofar as both Ngaio and Shade, look, I know that we've got probably some of the best skilled people in this space to take this forward. As my paper, I'm trying to advance some of that conversation because it highlights exactly what I tried to describe a moment ago. In between the well-being of our community and our environment are local authorities right across the board, including all the district councils, etc. And we know that there's going to be quite a lot of fast-tracking decision-making in amongst this process. And we need the best of people sitting at that table that have got the integrity and the obligation to trickle that both to the bottom And that being back to your marae and hapu, with an obligation to receive and actually have that bottom come back up to the top. Now, if the system is enabling that to happen, because we've got to just take into consideration that building back better, safer, smarter communities, on that diagram, it makes reference to genuine partnership with Maori, addressing inequalities, and we're talking about those inequalities right now. And so I get that that's it's a sealed number, and I think the integrity and obligation needs to be afforded at least at that level and input. So I would support those two people, such as Naya, because it's not in amongst the mix. Kia ora.
Roger, did you have anything to add? All right. Engari for Wairo, I comes Paura. Paura, you got anything to add for Wairo?
Yes, I've just been listening to the conversation. Oh, sorry, I left this in the toilet. I had to run away. Just listening to the conversation going around the table, and what the point that I picked up on was what Bate had said. We're in it on our own, and the road being closed hasn't helped our matters at all. So I see I've got in front of me a recovery plan from Wairo, and they're very, very active up there. I haven't been able to get up there myself, but I did email the district council and the Tai Whenua yesterday and asked for some sort of report, what you're doing, so, and I've got this here. But it hasn't been authorised through the Wairo District Council yet, so I can't table it here, I can only speak to it. And it's quite a comprehensive plan. So, and they're active and they're going ahead. So, irrespective of the damage they've got. So what part of that does the regional council play? Well, it comes back to the core responsibility in flood damage. And so far in the history of Wairo, we've received one monitor on the railway bridge. That's the measure of the district council's help so far.
Oh, I thank you for that point.
Kia ora.
Engari, did you want to add anything?
Not really, thank you, Mr. Chair, but yeah, it's, representation is a difficult question to answer, right? I feel for Te Whanganui Aorotu. I wish you all the luck.
Thank you. So just to wrap this up, because we need to move forward. So the terms of reference are sitting there. It does allow for 2 members from out of this committee. Remembering that the Environmental Integration Catchment Committee was already in place. There was 2 memberships on it with the possibility of an alternate. What we happens is we've had the cyclone. The decision was made at council to establish a cyclone recovery committee, but incorporate it into the catchment committee. Whether that will actually continue through to the end of the term, I think is yet to be seen.
Yeah,
Because
it's fluid.
I'm struggling to see the synergies coming through yet, because they're just not coming through. They're totally two different conversations. So don't be surprised if we end up having to separate it back out again, because it's not fulfilling its requirement into the catchment stuff. But that's something that'll highlight itself. So the question is here, we have two positions available to us. My suggestion is here is for the continuity of conversation, because that's what it actually comes down to. To make sure we're getting the conversations coming right through all of the way, and we're not segregating those conversations. That my recommendation is to leave it to the 2 co-chairs, because we're sitting there with council as it is now. We're part of the workshops. We make ourselves available. We're making sure that your kōrero gets up to the table. That's where it has to get to. It's got to get to the table. Where it goes from there is really, that's where the conversation has to happen at that table. and your ability to push the conversation.
Yeah, sorry, I disagree. I think we got a nomination on the table.
Yeah, yeah.
And then.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. But that's my whakaaro. Okay? Right, so we've got to get to conversations because I want to get us to the cyclone report because that's must be the most important thing. Got one nomination here, Peter. It's been seconded. I'm nominating Kasaraina because I think it's important Waido. Given its isolation, that is our co-chair. It has mana. We've already nominated her to the committee in the first place.
And Jenny, this conversation, we would have had this in-house prior to this meeting, but because we're rushed and we would have talked through all this, I'm just going to put that on the...
Yep.
Obviously, we support all our Maori, but then obviously...
We are where we are.
Just where we are, we have to have those conversations.
Just a point of clarification, so just around this table, even though Baden being a member of this committee, and he's put forward, I would support, I will be nominated, if so possible.
Tapai, have we got a seconder for Kasaraina? Thank you, Paula. Niall, you've been nominated, are you happy?
I think I missed the key part of that discussion in that nomination. So that wasn't...
It's a commitment of your time, Niall. That's all you really need to know.
Yeah, well, okay, if I could just touch on what we want to look at is quite specific, probably not the full gambit of that committee, and I'm not really au fait just getting
So
up
we're
to
looking for
speed.
representation on that committee. You're being nominated. Are you happy to accept?
Okay, if that's what Baden put, yeah, but like you say, I would want probably a more in-depth discussion about the cyclone recovery in general, because it's sort of like we've all talked about. Who would he talk about? Where do we have the discussion for building back better and some of the operations, to be honest? But
in this committee?
I'll accept that.
Mr. Chair, with all respect, no, it would have to be a
Actually, no,
member.
he's not either.
Yeah.
Sorry, he's
No,
not.
Baden is.
Baden's the committee. Sorry, Niall, my apologies. I didn't realise that it was Baden's the member.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Aroha mai.
And just to be clear, for the environmental, I don't really want to be on the environmental, but the recovery is where we want to have impact. So you know, environmental, happy for that, but obviously for Te Whanganui Arotu, it's the recovery that's the key.
So you're on both. That's it. It's both. It's the recovery and the environmental. Those are the terms of reference at this point in time. It may separate, may not.
Yeah, I just need to be clear on that because environmental, I'm happy with that makeup. The recovery is where we want to have impact.
Mr. Chairman.
Are you staying, Pot? You keep your nomination in?
At this stage, yeah, and things can change like you're saying, it can change back out to the environmental.
I'll leave you there for now.
Mr. Chairman, you know, I stated what I stated earlier on, and not one to repeat myself, but I'm now genuinely concerned that the Tamatea voice will get lost because there seems to be focus on specific area.
Correct.
And not a global focus.
Correct.
And that makes me very uneasy when we've shifted from the beginning of this conversation to a rohe-wide approach to certain key areas. So, you know, we may not vote at all in this because we're not happy, and I can't think of a solution off the top of my head to nominate. I'm not in the game of just nominating people for the sake of nominating. But I know, because we've just held a meeting on Monday, that we're going to be very titchy about this because we just don't see ourselves in that global recovery.
Anyway.
Kia ora, just listening in and providing some context to this representation challenge we have. So Regional Planning Committee have put forth their chair, their co-chair, who's Tanya Hopmans from Mangaharuru Tangitu Tangoil, and the co-deputy chair, Kiri Ropiha, from Tamatea Heretaunga and the position she sits on that PSGE. When we reflect on Te Wairoa with Katarina, a highly impacted area, and then you can start to sense where across the rohe isn't represented if we think of more pan-global. We have our Northern Māori seat councillor and our Southern Māori seat councillor that should range across there. So in reality, we can't have everyone from every marae on this committee. So that's the reality. But we can be strategic and trust in the leadership that we do have for continuity, as Mike suggested, from this committee to the Recovery Committee through to Council, which is the important connector as well. So taking all that on board and having some faith and trust within the leadership that is here to represent us all is the frame of mind I think we need to come from in making this decision. So I'll just leave it there with you, Chair.
Chair. I just wanted to reiterate Dr. Roger Marker's point, and that is whoever those two representatives are, they're representative in a global sense, not in a locality sense. That's their role, and that should be incorporated as part of the terms of reference to that Recovery Committee.
Any further comment?
No, let's vote and get it over and we can move on to the next thing. Yeah. And then that's cool, whatever it things say, and then it's done, and then we just move on, and then whoever gets on, then we just hold them accountable when we go through the process. Yep, okay, cool.
Cool, so we've got 2 nominations. Katarina, Peter, I'm going to call nominations closed. I'm going to move on. Can I have a seconder, please?
Both nominations.
Both nominations, we're done.
I shall, Mr. Chairman. Oh, would that be in conflict in the Jutai whenua? I'd prefer someone else.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
So we have our two nominations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you, done. Peter and Katalina. Those are our two nominations to the Recovery and to the Climate blah, 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 blah committee.
Well, we've got the Climate Action Committee, we've currently got Paul Kelly on that committee.
There's one more nomination to fill with the Joint Climate Action Committee. So they're different committees.
Did you not just, so we not just say that they were combined?
No.
It
was the RCC and the Recovery Committee.
Are they two separate committees?
Recovery and
Climate Action.
Yeah, separate. We're not interested in one, not interested in supporting the Oscars.
Thank you.
So the Climate Action Committee currently has Paul Kelly as a member and Mare Apatu as an alternate. And I think from memory, there was a move to have someone from Tamatea as that space and that as the other member.
Yeah, it was Dr. Marker. Are we happy with those nominations?
Aye.
I think we had enough discussion. So we move in a second, please. Yep. Thank you, Yapi. Second, please.
Yes.
Thank you, Heather White. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Thank you. Carried. Thank you very much. We got there. Okay, let's go straight away to item. I'm mindful of the time. It's just gone 10 o'clock. Item 9. So we kind of got halfway through this conversation already, but get to play. Thank you, Chris.
Got some other exec members will come up as well. We've got a bit of a tag team.
It's on the
system. It's on the desktop. Which one is it?
Try Maori Committee.
That one? It's just truncated.
Here it is. All right.
No?
Let's just minimise that because it's Louise in the middle there.
Yeah,
Maori Committee.
that one there. Okie dokie. Pop it there. Right, so this is really just a high-level presentation of a few things. One is a brief description of the event, and I guess we're well down the track in the event now. Everyone probably has extensive knowledge of how the event has impacted their local community, so we won't dwell on that. except to really convey the significance of the event and the impact really for the entire region in one way or another. Then we'll cover a little bit around some of the recovery activities for Hawke's Bay Regional Council's core business, which is really around the rural recovery area and our flood control and drainage, and also cover off some forward steps in terms of the various reviews that are going on. Communities and individuals can participate in those reviews. So that's the plan. Just checking in, there's a bit on the agenda and you did want to finish at 10:30. How much time do you think you'd like to spend?
This must be the most important part of our day.
Right.
Is actually to get update for our members.
Okay, and look, happy to take questions as we go, so we can sort of tailor things to where people might want some further information. So I'll start off, and then probably hand to Ian, and then hand to Susie as well. So, look, obviously we all know Cyclone Gabriel was a significant event. There was significant damage to a lot of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council's infrastructure. So certainly our big flood control schemes were overwhelmed by the event. The event was well over the design capacity of those schemes. And the breaches in those schemes, the primary mode those breaches occurred was from prolonged overtopping, scouring the downstream toe, and eventually, after hours of overtopping, that stop bank being eroded away. And so that's the key, I guess, failure mode, and all of that will be looked at in great detail through the various reviews that are occurring and will all be reported back in due course. We did have significant flooding across the whole region, and it's probably important to understand for the layperson, there is a difference between flood control schemes, which have a high level of protection, typically around 1 in 100. So that's not risk-free. It actually means in any average year, there's a 1% chance of that protection being exceeded by a climatic event. And our drainage schemes, which provide a lot lower level of service, which is typically around 1 in 5, and allows agriculture and just generally dries out the land in the local area. So we've got 25 schemes in total. We've got our 2 big flood control schemes, which is the Heretaunga Flood Control Scheme and the Upper Tukituki Flood Control Scheme, and Macra is also a flood control scheme. The rest of our schemes are pretty much drainage schemes. So important to understand because a lot of people are of the view that the drainage scheme didn't provide any protection against this cyclone, and there would not be an expectation that a drainage scheme would do that. But we're happy to hear people's views on what schemes we should have where through some of the reviews that we'll talk about.
Just a question on the drainage and that, does that, because some of the drain areas, and you know more than me, but have those been encroached by farming practices into those areas?
No, we've got a lot of drains through farming areas, and there's normally a 6 metre offset, and so from time to time there is encroachment. We normally deal with that with the landowner because we need that 6 metre corridor to do our maintenance, and we've got pretty robust reporting on our maintenance, and I can talk a little bit about some locations as well. Many of our smaller schemes, like in the Tangawai Valley and the Esker Valley, are really stream maintenance schemes. So they have very low budgets. I think in Tangawai Valley, it's about $12,000 a year is the budget for that scheme, and it really is to maintain vegetation within that stream, and there's no nameplate capacity in terms of the level of service it provides. It's simply a maintenance activity of those streams and drains. So I won't dwell on that too much, just wanted to highlight there is that key distinction. What do we do as the Regional Council when we have a weather warning? So we have a direct line with the Met Service, and staff talk to the Met Service about what's going on. We then take a synthetic rainfall prediction from the Met Service, and we put that through our models to try and predict for our big rivers in particular what we believe the event is going to do and how we should prepare. So we went into that with a prediction of around a 1 in 50 year event, which is well within the capacity of our big schemes. And up in Wairau, it was looking like a 1 in 20 sort of event. As it transpired, we got significant rainfall over and above what was forecast, and that's highlighted in this slide here, where many of our locations recorded double the rain that was forecast.
Yeah, and that shows a flaw in the system. And I said, my son was on the roof having to get rescued.
Yep.
Hey, phone me, Dad, what in the whare, what do I do?
Yep.
So, hey, obviously I got concerns about the system where when our whānau, and right through Waiheke, we've heard all the stories about whānau, water, tongoia, and that. So that shows me a flaw in the system when our whānau could have drowned. Hey, so obviously, I suppose I'll be looking at a solution model. How do we stop that? And I had one meeting with the Napier City Council, with Mayor Wise, and she said, I said, well, the alarm system, like when we were growing up, the alarms used to go off, and it signalled to us something was wrong. But she said, I know there's a 20-page report to say why those are ineffective, but you tell that to our whānau that were asleep in bed and no warning. Hey, so I'm just saying with your modelling, big concern about those basic, the old siren alarm goes.
So what I can say is the areas of concern, based on the information that was presented to us from Met Service, were contacted about the risk. I don't want to get into all of that here because, again, we've got a civil defence review, we've got a Hawke's Bay Regional Council review, and if we simply get into that level of detail at every location, we won't get through the material.
And my main point there is we had whānau asleep in their bed, water coming in through the whare.
Yeah.
And no warning. So it just has to be addressed because we don't want to put them in that situation again.
Absolutely agree with that. Yeah. So really highlighting significant amounts of rainfall, and when you talk to the technical guys, because of the wind, some of these could be underread by about 20% due to how the wind impacts the equipment.
So Chris, at Waiheke, the river created its own spillway. Does the council have plans for spillways further up river?
So, look, that's probably getting into the end of the presentation. What I will say just briefly on that is one of the activities we're doing is looking at our two big flood control schemes to understand how they respond in an over-design event. So we call this an over-design event. The event exceeded the design capacity of the protection that was in place. Any engineered solution will always have finite capacity. Even if you build it to 1 in 1,000, there may still be a chance, a very small chance, that could be exceeded. And what we want to explore is through these reviews, which are very detailed technical reviews of the two big schemes, is how can we reconfigure those schemes so they respond in a known and a planned way in an over-design event. Because if the rain fell slightly in a different place on the day, we would have potentially had different outcomes, breaches in different locations. And so we weren't in control of that. The weather was in terms of where it landed and the response of the river. So there's a couple of other things. There's rumours that spillways were blown up. That certainly did not occur. So I can categorically say there was no spillways either created through any means, but we were looking at those options, but those options panned out to be not particularly useful. And so going down the track, there might be options that we look at, but that'll be a discussion first with this recovery committee, then with council, then with community about how those might work. And it's far too early to work out.
I've just heard, from our Omahu whānau, maybe up Auckland Road for the Ngaruroro, maybe some type of spillway could be developed up that neck of the woods.
So they're all options that we're looking at, and it's a sort of offline storage or secondary flow paths is the terminology, and all of that stuff will be looked at. Historically, there was probably not a strong support for those sorts of solutions as they do eat into the productive land.
They may become part of the resilience plan.
So they're part of So they're part of the resilience plan. They make the scheme more resilient and the community more resilient.
So I'm mindful of the time, Chris.
Yep, we'll just move on. So really just wanted to highlight the extent of some of the flooding, and obviously in Wairoa through North Clyde there was that breach of the Wairoa River. Now this is the same type of breach that occurred in Cyclone Bowler, and really it's an opportunity to let everyone know here that we are we've been in regular discussions through the river managers sector in New Zealand and with government about opportunities for Wairoa in terms of proper high-level flood control, how that would be funded, etc. Also an opportunity to say we had plenty of staff up in Wairoa through the event, so not only our relationship manager was part of the Wairoa District Council Civil Defence effort, a key component of that effort, and our normal ICM staff. We also had dedicated asset management staff who had travelled up to be redeployed prior to the event. We subsequently helicoptered them back after a couple of days because their hotel was flooded out as well. We've had our works group up there over the last month or so doing some maintenance work. We've changed out some pumps at Ohuia Pump Station. We've had staff down from Bay of Plenty undertaking asset management tasks. And so we have been quite busy in that area. And I guess there's the perception that because the road is no longer open, that the Regional Council is not active. But we certainly are active as we can be, and we can always do more. But part of it is around sharing our resources around everywhere to do a little bit for everyone.
Did you say you had them up before the flooding?
Yeah, so they were pre-deployed before the event. Yep.
And just one of my quick questions would be, how come there was no one deployed to Waiheke to Taikuri? Being a Maori community that we have high occupancy, why wasn't the same thing?
So what I mean by deployed is we had staff deployed for the reasons of managing the flood, not managing individual communities. So in terms of Waiheke and the Turaikuri River, we had our EOC operating over the weekend. That was located at our Guppy Road depot, just over the road from Waiheke there, and they were working for the entirety of the region. We don't simply have sufficient staff to deploy a specialist flood response staff member to every community in Hawke's Bay. That's not our operating model. It could be, but we'd probably need 200 staff in asset management for that sort of function. So we're on the ball, guys working all through the weekend, providing information to our councillors, providing information to certain parties of the community, remembering the input information from the Met Service and our assessment of the situation. And I guess there will be a review to understand what can be done better.
And that can be back up the review. I just want to make that point again. And then obviously for when we got a lot of whānau in our community that are at risk from the river, then there must be some, we talk about technology, and that must be some tool to give pre-warning and then have a staff member get to the community. That's where I'm going with the point. Yeah. Just so we're aware and we can fix it.
Yeah, cool. And we had some failures of infrastructure, the sheet wall near the playground there, we had a total failure of, and a whole bunch of other things. So I'll just move through. Obviously in the Tongoi Valley, significant impact there, and the community and Marae have been working hard to recover, and both Hastings District Council and ourselves have been part of that process as well. Obviously, ESC, we're all aware of the significant, basically devastation through the ESC Valley. A lot of concern around, the flooding could have been mitigated if you'd just opened the river mouth. Is a bit of a common feedback we're getting from the community. That river mouth was cleared in preparation for this event, and quite simply, when a valley is flooding from one side of the valley to the other, the water is not even going down the riverbed. It's not even going out the river mouth. And so it just goes to the extent, of this event. And obviously, Heretaunga, we had multiple breaches, significant flooding, Motio, Omahu, Pakawhai, and numerous other areas. I won't name them all, and absolute devastation. Obviously too in central Hawke's Bay, we had flooding in Waipawa. And what I will note, we haven't put up every single place that was flooded. So if your particular location is not a photo, we're just trying to point out some of the significant impacts and acknowledging that impacts are right across the Rahi. And we also had a major breakout of the old into the Papanui stream, which was where the Waipawa River once flowed. And that had a significant impact for some landowners as well.
So Chris, there's a number of breaches, as you pointed out, right across the region.
Yeah.
A number of overflow incidents. How safe are we now?
So so one of the first things we did in the week or two after the event was to understand that we needed to make some real forward momentum around protection of life. So on the Heretaunga Plains and the Upper Tukituki scheme, these schemes protect vast numbers of people, urban environments from floods, and we just don't. You never know what's around the corner in terms of when the next flood might come. So we rapidly put in some bunding, and so that was temporary bunding at all of the breach locations as best we could. Some of the locations were a little bit tricky, and so that provided like a low level of protection, about a 1 in 5 year level of protection within weeks of the event, and that was to ensure that the devastation that had occurred and communities were really, challenging times for communities. We didn't want a minor flood then coming out and interrupting the recovery process that was going on. Since then, and so I'll flick over these slides when we get there, we created a pod system and a rapid rebuild team. And again, in the community, I've heard, well, why isn't the rapid rebuild team out in my community? The rapid rebuild team is there for our big flood control schemes where we've got basically parts of the stop banks washed away and those communities, at risk of smaller floods and bigger floods. And they're about probably halfway through patching up or putting back those stop banks to the existing level of service. So at Omahu, for example, there's been a repair there next to the bridge that's complete. Repairs completed down at Awatoto. Repairs completed in the small golf course one, and there's quite a few others. We're about halfway through that program. Repairs on the Waipawa River, and so we've got about 8 to 10 weeks to go, and that's again weather permitting, because with very wet weather, it delays earthworks. So we've got about 8 to 10 weeks to go, and we would have finished that initial tranche of work to protect the community back to that 1% risk. With a few caveats, because we're also testing as we do that work. We're not waiting for the test results. We're carrying on with the work. And then when we're finished, we can look at all the test results and know, success for us is all the test results are good. It means compaction levels and the technical details of that stop bank are good, and we don't need to go back. But if in the rush and the rapid rebuild process, there's a few things that didn't go quite right, we have that information. We can go back and make a mitigation there as well. So I think that's really good news, that basically in another couple of months, the big breaches in our big schemes, which had significant impact on large numbers of people, will be rectified. Then after that, we've got all the scour damage. So you'd refer to that as weakening of that stop bank. There's about 30 kilometres of weakening. So this wasn't just a bit of overflow here and there. This was 35 plus kilometres of stop bank being overtopped for hours on end by a metre or so. And so we've got extensive downstream scouring, and that'll take probably another 6 or so months to repair as well.
So there was a number of monitoring sites that were, if you like, washed away.
Yep.
Have they all been restored?
Yep.
Yeah, I can talk to that. Yep, so we had a number of sites that were completely destroyed or damaged in the process, and we now have a fully effective and reinstated network. Fair to say that some of them are not permanent solutions, but we do have a monitoring network that is now the full coverage that we had before. One of the reviews that Susie will talk to shortly was looking at whether that monitoring network is still the right one, given what we know now off the back of this. So there may be additions to come.
So, sorry for cutting in by trying to get as much information out in the shortest possible period of time. Yeah. So Susie, we just talked about a number of reviews that are going to take place, which is great. How do we feed into these reviews? Because we've heard it here this morning.
Yeah. So I'll just pull up the slide. There's quite a few that are happening, and there is a good way to be involved.
Quite a few slides before we were going to get there.
There we go.
Right, here we go. So what I'm trying to articulate here is the number of reviews that we will be part of or leading going forward. And I want to start at the top. So recently the CEDAM Joint Committee announced that there will be an independent review of the civil defence response. So I want to be really clear that is a civil defence response. and how that operated through the review. Now, the key with that one is that being a joint committee, each territorial authority and Hawke's Bay Regional Council all play a part in managing that. At the moment, that will be independently led. That is still to be confirmed who that will be and the terms of reference. But announcement has been made to the public that that will go forward. The key one I want to talk about this morning is that Hawke's Bay Regional Council independent review. At the council meeting last week, our councillors signed off a proposed terms of reference
Is that the next one?
for that review. It is in the hands currently of our interim CE, Mr Bayfield, to confirm and finalise the terms of reference for that and appoint an independent panel. That is likely to start in June. Now, the intent of this one is that is participatory with communities. That is where you will have your voice at the table. You will be heard by the independent committee.
Thanks, Susie. And just to add on to that the Māori Partnerships team have approached Bill and will work with them in terms of engagement with those highly impacted Māori communities into the terms of reference before it's finalised to council.
So, through you, Mr Chairman, we discussed that at the council meeting. You were present, and there was my strong suggestion that certain parties be allowed to take a look at the terms of reference before we kick off to find out if there's any really strong objections. You can imagine that probably focuses on Napier and Hastings District Council, but I see absolutely no reason why all of those affected Maori are also given a crack at them, and TK is going to help me sort that out. That'll be in the next few days. There's still some work to do on exactly who that panel is and when it'll kick off and how long it'll run for, etc.
And so our input, obviously, Mike, we've got our committee here, and then obviously we'll be looking at, we're feeding into that process because that's why we come to these meetings. So through Mike, we'd want to make sure we overview whatever decision, and then we're involved in the process because we're a Māori Standing Committee. That's what our job is. So, yeah, just so you're aware of that. I don't know how you're engaging ourselves in, but I just need to make that point as well.
Yeah. So I suppose it'd be fair enough that the terms of reference are still being, if you like, finalised. We're just making sure that, there's avenues for us to input into the outcomes, because that's important. If we're not inputting, then we're never going to be satisfied in regards to its makeup. The fact that there's independence to it as well, and including the panel, that was important, because that gives us all confidence in regards to those outcomes. Might like the outcomes, but at least we know there was some independence to it.
And Mr Chairman, if I could add, while there's a focus on the big schemes, there's also the question whether or not some other places should have schemes.
Yep.
And so nobody's shut out of this. This is the whole of Hawke's Bay. And Council has made very clear that Wairoa is fully involved, and we've already had a number of queries from Tongoio and others as to will they have their chance, and I'm sure Petane, and they'll have their chance to speak to the inquiry too. When you do one of these, you do it as broad as you can.
Susie, did you want to add anything else in regards to these reviews?
No, the other ones, the bottom 5 down below, are internally led reviews for various purposes around improvements and what opportunities there are to go forward. Any information here will be supplemented, available to the independent review and vice versa.
So part of that reviewing is where we were prior to the cyclone, where we got to with the cyclone, and what does recovery look like, and what does resilience look like? Would that be a fair assessment as part of that review process? Because we need to know what the future's going to look like in regards to...
In relation to the flood schemes, telemetry, hydrometry, absolutely correct, yep.
Thompson, I saw your hand up there, up on the board.
Ai, kia ora tātou tērā koe te hia mana tātou anō ko te komiti Māori nei. Just straight to a pātai that's probably directed at towards Chris. I heard you comment earlier about the minimal budget in that in the scheme out at Tāngoil. I suspect and I would expect it to there to be some major changes in and around that. Otherwise, it kind of signals a red flag to me of resource equitable resource being distributed to some of those Māori communities. That I guess the narrative hasn't changed. It hasn't changed for
at least 2 or 3 generations, and that's been voiced through various kaumātua, whether it's Tangoil, whether it's out at Porangahau and those isolated communities further up to Wairoa. I think there's lots of similarities in those narratives. So, you know, I'm just curious as to what formula informed such a low budget to some of those communities.
So I can make a couple of brief comments, if you like. So one is part of this this review is to understand for each of our schemes the history, and a lot of them were created through the catchment board. And it's a conversation between the community, the level of service desired, and in terms of the formula for the funding, all of our flood control schemes are funded primarily through the beneficiaries, and that's the current policy position of council, and that can change, but it's quite common across New Zealand that the participants pay the lion's share of the funding. So so that's one thing. The other thing is each location probably has physical limitations of what can be achieved based on the hydrology, the catchment and the landform. And so some places are very challenging to provide high levels of flood protection. And so this is, over history, there's been conversations with the community, but one thing we want to achieve through this review is to understand why is the scheme in its current day the way it is? What decisions were made perhaps by predecessors that because the infrastructure we have today is the culmination of the last 30 years of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and the 20 years of the catchment board before that, and then whoever before that as well, plus borough councils and all sorts of other things. So what we have today is the result of decades of decisions and decades of investment. So we're happy to look at that and work out the best way forward.
Yes, kia ora, Mr. Chairman. Hey, Chris, who's responsible for our pumping stations? Namely, say, Farndon Road and maybe Muddy Creek over by Takati.
So Farndon Road and Muddy Creek are both managed by the Hawke's Bay Regional Council.
They don't seem to be working too well, you know, and it doesn't matter when it floods, you know, it could be a minor flood. Those pumping stations are hopeless.
Yep. So this comes down to levels of service and what the agreed levels of service are, and there's a discussion with the community every 3 years through our LTP. All our levels of service are in the public domain, and the level of service for a pumped drainage system is to remove 22 millimetres, I think, of rain per hectare per day from the landform. So in my prefacing comments, what I was trying to highlight is that those drainage schemes will have localised flooding effects during a major rain event, but they will, over the following weeks or days, drain that water away. And if the community would like a different level of service, then that's a conversation with council around how it's funded, how it's delivered, is it realistic, and what are the benefits? Is there actually a business case for increased investment?
How old are they?
Yeah.
How long have they been there?
So many of them are built in 1950 or so.
Yeah, well, there you are. There's the problem.
Well, but what we do as asset managers is replace components as they're required, just like the old axe, granddad's axe sort of thing. Pumps get replaced, motors get replaced, and they all get replaced on a different frequency.
Thank you.
So in preparation, just in preparation of coming up to the engagement that's going to need to take place, would it be useful for the committee to have a workshop prior to regional council coming out to your communities? So there's a lot of information that actually would be useful to know. So you just kind of asked as one there, Uppies, how come your pump is at that level? And so the answer is based on the depth of your pockets at a local level, how much you're prepared to put in, how big a pump you want at the end of the day. But that's the type of information we need to know and understand in order to be able to engage fully when you come out. Not only do we need to understand that, but we need to inform our communities, because we're only going to get mileage out of this based on our knowledge that we have of how things work. That'll form our input into the reviews. Would it be useful to have a workshop, even if it's an online workshop? Doesn't have to be in person.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's an excellent idea. I really do. A hearing like this can be a pressured and sometimes quite daunting process. And to kind of do some preparation before you get there for all of us would be a really smart move.
Yeah.
Do you want that moved as a motion?
I think that can be one of our outcomes from out of this conversation. I think it'd be
Absolutely.
useful.
Happy to do that. We can pick out the best way. Absolutely.
We'll do it online. It'll be easy online, especially for our Wairoa whānau. Even if it's a couple of hours, 2-3 hours. If you can give us the information prior so we can read it before we get to that workshop, that would be great. I'll go to Mare then Anna.
Oh, sorry, Anna,
Mare.
you were. Yeah, sure. I think that was a good suggestion, and I really support that. But I think too, also, I'm aware that the those pump stations are also coming up for reconsenting. Is that correct?
So that's a big question. So we have some pump stations that are in a consenting process, and we have some pump stations that are already consented and have lengthy consents.
So I thank you for that. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm aware too also that there could be some other issues around fish passage and all those sorts of things that come into play. So just to widen that discussion out. Thank you.
You want to put your net in front of the pump there?
It's already out, isn't it?
Kia ora, Chris. Earlier you presented about the measure and difference of the observed and predicted rain. A couple of questions I had was, for the monitoring, what are the tools that are used, and also what's the regularity of the observance with the cyclone specifically?
Yeah. So Ian can answer that.
Talk to the monitoring tools. So we have a large number of what we call hydrometric monitoring sites throughout the region. So we measure river levels, and we do that using a variety of instruments. So we typically have at each site redundancy. So we have a measure of water levels plus a similar or different piece of equipment doing the same thing. So if one fails, the other one picks it up. That's all logged. So it goes into a machine that every 15 minutes data goes into it. We also have networks that collect rainfall information, wind speed, temperature, all those sorts of things. Sometimes they're with the flow recorders, sometimes they're in different locations. They also have a logging system, so if communication to the site is lost, then we still collect the data. All that information is gathered up and sent either via a cellular network, via satellites. Now we're starting to move to satellites because they seem to be the most reliable. And our primary mechanism is using a system of VHF radios through the region to send it back to a computer where we can see and report it. We see that real time.
So that's great. And so in terms of the comms that were received and updates that were put out, what did that look like with this event?
So one of the issues with this event is that at some stage during the cyclone, power was lost to one of our key repeater sites. That repeater site had some redundancies built into it that also then failed. So we actually lost, for large periods of time, real-time information about what was happening both from a river flow and a rainfall perspective. We've been able to collect and report all that information because despite the power being lost to communicate back to us from the sites, all that data was still being logged by the instruments at the time. So we retrospectively know it happened, but the communication failed. One of the reviews that Susie highlighted in the graphic before was the telemetry resilience. So it's what we call telemetry. So we have an independent party looking at what worked, what didn't, why it didn't work, what we need to do to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Just to be clear, we have two key sites as well, Kaharanaki and Mount Misery. The Mount Misery site worked flawlessly. Kaharanaki was the one that failed, and it's our key site.
Kia ora.
Shay, do you want to add something, Shay?
Through the chair, just a question, if that's all right, to Chris. I just wanted to know if there were modelled scenarios for the event that
you know, presumably the digital elevation model was premised on LiDAR and using all the, I guess, the relevant information, the Hertz system to model this event. It's been recently made aware that there had been those predictions for this type of event, particularly in Pakowhai. And I wonder if you guys had been aware of that. And I guess it's not wishing to place blame, but looking to the future and how we might manage floods in the future. And obviously, you know our whakaaro is about using more natural-based solutions for that. And if there wasn't understanding and awareness of those modelled scenarios that not exactly, but demonstrated that this was a likely occurrence, would you then therefore change the way in which we manage gravel extraction, for instance, or widening the stock banks? And you mentioned areas for spillways, and whether or not another sort of idea, I guess, that we're very interested in is large-scale wetland development in different parts of the catchment. There's quite a few parts to that question. So the first part is around our flood modelling. So we have customised flood modelling. We don't use herds, for example, to do that. We have custom models that are developed for each river, and they use the synthetic rainfall forecasts from Met Service. And so that work indicated that we weren't in a position to have the outcome that we actually had. And so that was going into the event literally 12 hours, 6 hours before the event. That was our advice. So in terms of our communication and our concerns, we thought it would be a significant event, that we did not believe it was going to be a significant over-design event. And I guess the detail of that can be borne out in any review. The second part is the failure analysis of the system. So we are aware of the failure analysis of the system. And in fact, our upgrades to our stock banks funded through the Kānawa is prioritised around some of those high impact events, which is why the Taradale stock bank was upgraded, because that was a high impact area of a breach. And so what we do know is for the inside of both the Turaikuri River and the Ngararoro River, the overload plan flow paths end up down in Pakowhai. And it's all unwound in the early hours of the morning without data coming in, etc. So it was a very challenging situation for everyone, and I acknowledge how challenging it was for the people on the ground. In terms of where we want to head, we have recognised that we want to have a resilient flood control system that responds in a known way to an over-design event. We don't want to have another event like we've just had. So with climate change, and I think NIWA have already assessed that something like 15% of this event can be attributed to climate change. That will probably increase over time. We can expect, and we should fully expect, more significant events. Whether it's in next year or 30 years, at some point it will come. And so we want to reconfigure, reimagine our big flood control schemes so they are more resilient, and we are in control of how an over-design event. Now, what the solution is, we don't know, because we need to do that work, but it includes many of the things that you just spoke about, whether it's offline storage, and those storage can be wetlands, it can be overland flow paths, it can be widening stock banks out, all of those things. So they're all to be looked at, and then they'll obviously be prioritised, and there'll be an assessment criteria, and then obviously there'll need to be a funder of any and all of that work. So that's what's in front of us, but that's the direction that we're heading, and we'll be talking to everyone in the community about their thoughts about any reimagining of those schemes. So you weren't aware of the scenario that unfolded based on the Hertz model from NIWA? So no, we use customised models on our rivers. NIWA do a lot of work at a general level, and they've also done work into gravel extraction. And so this is an offline discussion because there's so many documents, so maybe we have an offline discussion.
For sure.
But we have dedicated models for all of our big river schemes as a primary source of information for our response. We are the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, they're our assets. NIWA does work all over the country. They do summary level work, they do some detailed work, but I just can't recall that exact piece of work. But happy to talk to you about that and provide some guidance.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So thank you, Chris. So basically what you're saying is that everything's on the table during these reviews?
Yeah.
There's nothing that's tougher than we're discussing. Everything will be open for discussion, and the questions that will be able to come forth is based on whatever people feel they need to put forward. So that's a great thing.
Just one point, Mike, I just want to make, just a simple thing. That thing, why can't we have those sirens as a short-term measure to warn our community when flood, you know what I mean? Because I brought up on sirens going off. Why, as a short-term measure?
So that's a question really for civil defence.
Civil defence, yeah.
They decommissioned that structure. They obviously had reasons why.
Cool. So we'll catch it up in that review and in that format.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody. Look, I appreciate that we've got people starting to have to leave. We've already left, and they've got to meet the tangi for Pat. So we're going to take everything else that's been read. In regards to the takiwā reports, if you have any questions, use our online invite and ask those questions directly of the various reportees. Kei te pai tērā. We'll come back with a date in regards to our workshop. And if we can start to think about the information we're going to be sharing and start to socialise that out so we can prepare ourselves and get ourselves into the right frame of mind. There needs to be some urgency around this because these reviews are going to take place pretty quickly, as in time frames. So it's about us getting out to our community and preparing them for these reviews, so we can actually partake fully.
Just to ensure that the paper that I submitted was submitted on behalf of Te Tai Whenua o Te Whanganui Arotu, our respective iwi, and it highlights all the key issues, and asks in that recommendation about all the discussion today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Stored and stuff.
So with that, can we take all the reports to be tabled, please?
Aye.
Thank you, Api. Thank you, Peter. All those in favour, please say aye. Kia ora. Thank you, everybody, for your input. All those on the wall, ka huriti a taraka ki a koe, Api e whakakapi a tātou hui te tātou.
Kia ora tātai. Ke hoki anō ki tēnā karakia mōhia te whānui tia, kairunga te tēpu nei, me ki ranga ngā pari rau tangata. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kine ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hia ki ana te apura, e teo, he huka, he hau lu, e